something difficult happens.
Sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, so I don't like practice self-compassion, meditation in particular, for instance, or any sort of specific practices. It's really just a mindset for me. I mean, it can be helpful when you're first learning to do specific practices, but it's really just a mindset. So I think it's changed over time, my habitual reaction to things. And so, by the way, it doesn't mean that things like shame don't still arise. So feelings of shame, for instance, if you do something like forget to show up for a meeting or something like that, it still arises. I think this is actually just evolutionary, these feelings of shame or embarrassment or like, oh, I can't believe I did that. But when it arises, instead of identifying with those feelings and believing them and saying I'm such a terrible person and then beating myself up for, trying to make sure I never do it again, I'll just, including it, first of all, I'll kind of acknowledge the pain of it. Oh man, that hurts. The shame hurts. The mistake hurts. Okay, well, it happens, right? I'm a human being. We're all human beings. Stuff like this happens, and just trying to be kind and encouraging to myself. So that's mainly how I practice it as a mindset. But it also depends on the level of intensity, right? So sometimes it's just very kind of casual and light. But if really big stuff happens, like I've had some big stuff happen to me lately, like with my work, that was just really, really painful. And when the big stuff happens, then I'll lay on my bed and I'll put my hands on my heart, and then I'll like much more consciously and explicitly find the pain in my body, hold it with mindful awareness, give myself love, kindness, usually with physical touch. I'll usually say things to myself that are comforting and soothing. So it does kind of depend on the circumstance. Yeah.
Thank you for being open and sharing about that. You wrote a lot about stories in your book.
Which one?
The
All
one
of them. That one, you're talking about that one. Okay, that's one we're focusing on. Great.
Is there a story about like an inciting event that prompted you to write Fear Self-Compassion?
Well, yeah, I mean, I tell it actually, this whole I think it's chapter 4, the story of my Me Too movement. That's really what prompted me, especially to write it for women, because realizing, the ugly hands of patriarchy and how it had so much of it we internalize. It's kind of internalized patriarchy we don't even realize in terms of how we relate to ourselves or other people. Sorry, I think that's can you hear those little things? It's my mom texts me. Sorry.
No worries.
But yeah, so and it was really a great experience writing that book, because so many threads of my life came together. There's that personal thread. I had this experience with this guy who turned out to be a predator, and just seeing firsthand like how I had not kind of allowed it to happen, not that I allowed it to happen, but that the things I blew off and other women involved, and just kind of all the patterns that are involved. So that was happening in my personal life. And then of course, externally, all these movements, the social justice movements, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, other movements. And I used to, before I got involved in self-compassion research, I used to research gender, culture, and power. I was really into that, and how we can empirically look at how power and equality, I know you read the book, so I'm repeating myself, but just for me, what happened was I used to be really interested in that. But then I kind of got into the self-compassion line of work. And then in my personal life, all this stuff was happening. And then just realizing the two sides of self-compassion, the fierce and the tender, and how that's the way it's so specialized in people. From my point of view, it's so tied to patriarchy. We don't even realize it. We're recreating it every time we buy into the idea that, oh, women aren't supposed to be angry, or men aren't supposed to be sensitive, or I need a man to make me happy and to be worthwhile. All those things are kind of just the internalization of power and equality and patriarchy, and realizing the role that self-compassion had in unraveling that, right? So not only the balance, but I know for me, what self-compassion gives you is the ability to be authentic, because when your sense of worth is unconditional, you don't care so much about what other people think of you. You know, I mean, it doesn't mean that you don't want them to like you, but your worth isn't dependent on it. And you care about yourself. And because you care about yourself, then it's important to you to be your true self. And authenticity, I think, is the most powerful way to undo, you might say, all these internalized biases. Now, it's not going to do everything. I'm not saying this is instead of changing social structures or voting, all that, yes, and. But we also have to deal with the social system, the unequal social system that's been built into us by growing up in this society that we live in, right? And I really find that self-compassion is a very good way to unravel all that. That's what I found personally. So that's why all these threads really came together in an exciting way. And, you know, the book, it doesn't sell as good as my other books, but I'm really proud of it.
Well, you have
maybe my most personally meaningful book. I felt like I really put a lot of my heart into that book. So what did you say, Nishan?
You have tons of fans in the Mindful Healthcare Collective. So
thank you.
Our collective is actually mainly women. So I think it resonated very deeply for everyone. So in terms of the difference between the yin and the yang and tender versus fierce, was that inciting incident also when you realized that there were two halves to self-compassion, or was there some other realization?
So that's something that, you know, Chris Germer, my colleague, and I had been playing around with for a while. I mean, so ever since the get-go, I've always bumped into this idea that people think self-compassion is soft or it's going to make you lazy. But I hadn't really articulated, I mean, I could say why it's not, but I hadn't really articulated that there actually are two sides of self-compassion, which partly confuses people. And part of what happened is actually Chris and I, our best work comes from the arguments we have. It's really true. We're like we butt heads, and whenever we butt heads, something really good comes out of it. And so we are
kind of like our board of directors meetings.
You haven't been there long enough, Nichang, to see the. Anyway, so I forget what was happening. I think, gosh, what happened? Oh, we were writing the manual to the Mindful Self-Compassion book, and Chris wanted to talk about this more like active side of self-compassion, and then not the soft side. And he said, well, I want to write a book on self-compassion for men to talk about this. And I said, what do you mean? That's not a male thing. See, I got angry at him. Like, what do you mean it's not a male thing? Women are just as, I'm actually more young than you are. So we kind of like, I mean, I'm really glad we moved away from calling it like the masculine and feminine side. That's why I love yin and yang, because it kind of points to these things, fierce and tender, masculine and feminine, but it gets rid of the gendered language, which is the whole problem in the first place, that we've gendered these things. And so we kind of realized that the yin and yang metaphor was a really good way to frame the difference. And then we started talking about it in the Mindful Self-Compassion program at a soft level. And then I wanted to run with it, because for me, once I started realizing the difference between yin and yang and how gender role socialization kind of splits these things, then I started seeing the connections. And then the Me Too movement happened. And then every single woman I talked with had a similar experience. And we all talked about how difficult it is to get angry, or it's actually not difficult for most people, it's difficult to get angry. It's not difficult for me to get angry. I'm kind of naturally angry by my nature, but people's reactions to me, how difficult those are. And I started realizing that women, I don't know how you all women feel, and don't let me just dominate the conversation. I'd like to hear this, but I feel like we are at a zeitgeist in history. You know, it's like, it's never before I think there's been a critical mass of women. We're educated, we're independent, you know, in the West. I mean, yeah, it's not everyone, but more than ever before. It's like, we aren't going to take it anymore. I feel that every woman I talk to says, I'm not going to take it anymore. And even a lot of my women like me, we're single, we're, you know, middle-aged, single. We can't find the right man. Those of us who are heterosexual can't find the right man. And it's like, you know what? I'm not going to play those games just to have a relationship. It's not worth it to me. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to like, oh, really? And pretend to be stupid and like play all those games that, you're supposed to play in these gender relationships. And every single woman I talked to was kind of in the same place. And I said, I need to write this for women to kind of try to put together some of my thoughts, which of course is just a very tiny piece in a much, much larger movement. Am I making sense or am I rambling?
No, you're making sense.
Okay. Anyway, do you agree that women, like, we're at a crossroads? It's like we aren't going back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
If you look at the chat box, there's a lot of
Yeah.
to that. Yeah. Especially with our grouping 90% physicians. So
yeah, well, and physicians, right? And so I mean, so a lot of I'm an academic, which is different, but still kind of male-dominated worlds. And the whole thing, I was also talking to all my female friends about that. In order to succeed in a male-dominated sphere, you've got to act like a man, prototypical man, which means you have to be fierce and not tender. And yet people don't like fierce women. So these catch-22s, and realizing just like, screw that, I'm going to be myself. I don't care if you like me or not. I'm just going to be myself, and I'm going to do such good work that hopefully, but I didn't get promoted to full professor, even though I had by far the most I think probably more citations, like 3 times as much as the next, it got me into trouble, but I don't care. I would do the same thing again because I don't know what medicine's like, but academia is, again, very patriarchal.
So from my own perspective, being a woman of color, being a pulmonologist, which is a very male-dominated field still, tips on how not to care so much.
Well, it really, when you really take self-compassion seriously, and also when you really take self-compassion seriously, the self becomes much less part of the equation, right? Which also means you take yourself less seriously when you take self. It's ironic because you're taking your own needs more seriously than you might if you think you're supposed to be valued, supposed to please other people. And yet you also start realizing this illusion of separate self and this idea that I'm this separate individual, separate from everyone else. You can much more tap into this larger interconnected self, right? Which simultaneously means you have as much right to care as everyone else, at the same time that we don't have to take our egos. It's not that we don't take ourselves as seriously, we don't take our egos as seriously. And so self-compassion makes you less ego defensive because you kind of see through the illusion of the ego, which means, yeah, I mean, I cried definitely when I didn't get promoted. I was angry, I cried the whole thing, but I also let it go pretty quickly. So it's not that I didn't feel it, I did, but I didn't perseverate on it. I felt it washed over me, and then I just moved on. But yeah, so the thing about having to act like a man to get ahead, we really have, and I'm not sure, I don't have the solution for it because it is a structural problem. And if you don't get promoted, that's also a problem. But we have to be aware, like, is that really what we want? My friend, my best friend, she's really into all this. And she says, our goal shouldn't be to participate. It should be to co-create. In other words, the problems is the men have set the structural rules. They've set up the system. This is what you need to be like to get ahead. And women, we've had to play the game to get ahead. But maybe now we can, when we start getting power, what we need to do is start saying, these rules are so patriarchal. Do we really want to participate in the system this way? Shouldn't we redesign the system? Isn't the way the system structured the problem in the first place? And it's easier said than done, but I just think as women, we have to get beyond, I want to compete with men and be, it's not like we want equal access. Well, at first we want equal access, and then we want to change the system because the system is broken.
100%. So much. So many.
I see lots of nodding heads. See, I'm not alone in this. And this book came out of conversations with women like you and all my friends. I mean, this is so bigger than me. This is like I start the book with something's in the air. it's true. Something transpersonal, bigger than any one person, that I think for women in particular is happening.
150%. Speaking about like systems and institutions in academics and really the framework of medicine, we know definitely that it's broken and designed by the patriarchy. And so how do we impose the change? How do we tear down the framework and rebuild in a way that is conducive to foster authenticity and growth for both women and men without like putting ourselves in a position where...
Yeah, and by the way, this will free men just as much as it frees women. It really will. It'll free everyone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But when we go against a lot of the steeped tradition of these systems, and we try to invoke the fierce self-compassion and boundaries, for instance, then we butt against like retaliation, and we butt against real actual harm to our careers.
Yeah.
So how can we reconcile trying to change the system and yet like still having a job?
Yeah, and these are big questions. I certainly don't have the answers. I will say though that you have to be wise, and it's not, so compassion is about alleviating suffering, right? So if you do something that and get retaliated against you and get fired, well, that's not compassionate, right? You aren't actually alleviating your suffering or anyone's suffering. So you've got to figure out kind of like when to choose your battles, right? Figure out where you can be effective, where you can't. It's not all going to happen at once. Just like yelling at people and calling them you patriarchal pigs, probably not a great idea. All those things. It's a really big question. For me, I'll be satisfied if just people become aware of what's happening, right? So it's one thing if this is totally unfair, but I'm going to play along because for right now, that's the best for me and the choices I make. But I know it's unfair versus people who internalize it and just think, oh, well, he's probably smarter than me. That's probably why he got, you know what I mean? Which is not that long ago. My mother's generation, people just kind of internalized it. I got it. Yvonne, I love you. When you say something, I love your face. You're like nodding. What are you thinking? I want to hear what you're thinking.
Honestly, now you just mentioned my name and I'm having, Nicheng's gonna laugh because now I'm having an out of body experience because I'm talking to you. Whoa, I'm like, so yes, no, you mean a lot to me and your work means a lot to me. So I'm trying not to go into full fangirl mode now.
Okay, because believe me, if you knew me, you wouldn't. If you knew the real me, I mean, it's not your projection probably comes from you. If you knew the real me, you would not be a fangirl. Believe me, I'm as messy as anyone else, really. Anyway,
that's so awesome. Thank you. But what I was thinking was, as you were talking, was this idea of self-compassion. The way you talk about self-compassion and how it relates to perfectionism, and so like I think with advocacy and all of the changes that we do, sometimes we want things to be perfect. We want the change now and we want everything to be perfect now. Yes. And I really love thinking about self-compassion in the framework of that, being against perfectionism and allowing ourselves to be kind and gentle and being mindful and being in that state while we're trying to bring the change, but knowing that the change is going to be messy, knowing that the change is going to be hard, knowing that it's going to be a longer road than we expect, as opposed to that perfectionism that everything has to be like this right now. So that's what I was thinking about as you were talking.
Yeah, well, that's a very good point. It is slow, it is messy, it's not perfect. But as long as we're aware, and that's really where the mindfulness comes in. So you guys are the mindfulness collective. I don't know what you felt about this whole thing of self-compassion in its fierce form. The mindfulness is clarity, seeing clearly. I mean, people think of mindfulness just as awareness, but like if you look at social justice movements, it's mindfulness that allows us to say, hey, that's not right, the way you're treating me or the way you're, making this decision. Mindfulness is much more than awareness. It's also about truth. Now that gets tricky, of course, because what's the truth? And just because I think it may not, so even that's really messy as well. I'm not going to pretend it's not. I mean, some of my friends, I must say, I've got a friend he's a man, I don't know, but he's really he's into non-duality and all those things, but kind of slips into relativism really quickly. Relative. By the way, so I did my dissertation on the field of moral development, and the whole thing was relativism versus is there a moral truth? Is there a moral right, or is it all relative? And I really think that compassion leads us to there are moral rights and wrongs. And so some people I know, the mindfulness is just like, well, it's just all an illusion and it's all your perspective. And we need to be open to all points of view. I mean, you're open to all points of view, pretty soon you're in moral relativism and you've got no position on which to say, stop, that's not okay. We need to change, you're wrong. We need to be able to say you're wrong, even though we may be wrong that the person's wrong. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? We can't just say it all depends on your point of view. No, because then the people with the power, their point of view counts.
So sometimes equanimity is not necessarily a good thing, especially in the social justice realm.
I think it could be misused. Yeah. I mean, I think you look at Inside LA, Spirit Rock, all the big meditation groups, they're all waking up to the fact that we can't just be about sitting on our cushion and having equanimity. And, from one point of view, it is. So I'm actually going on a non-dual retreat for a whole week this week. Rupert Spira, I don't know if you've heard of him. I'm really excited about it. He's a really interesting non-dual teacher. So from one point of view, you might say from the ultimate spiritual point of view, it's all just the universe, God, whatever you want to call it, beingness, being experienced simultaneously. There's no time, there's no space. And from that point of view, it is true that it's kind of doesn't really matter. There's no right or wrong. It's just, it all just isness all of the time. And so through ancient meditation practice, that's one of the places of the insights you can get, and you can actually live in that space. So like there's the non-dual space, which is one type of reality, but then there's the dual space, which is I'm, me, we're separate people and we suffer and all this happens and there's time and space and past, present, and future. I'm sorry if I'm getting too abstract for you guys, but basically I think we need to be able to have one foot in both. Some people, and I know a lot of them personally, use spiritual practice as spiritual bypass to avoid the hard questions of racism and sexism and inequality and war and all that stuff. They just like want to exit out of the mess. And I think it's good to have one foot not in the mess. Maybe you can one part of your brain in this kind of bigger, peaceful, we're all one, we're all God breathing in and out, whatever you want to look at it, space. But the truth is, here we are as individual human beings living a human life, and we have a responsibility because when we're in this realm of non-duality, we do suffer. So this is some of the backdrop is when I first came on the scene, you might say, with the self-compassion work, I got a lot of blowback from Buddhists because isn't the self the problem? Isn't the separate self the problem? Aren't you thinking us more about the self? Isn't it all about no self? And, like Mathieu Ricard, I don't know if you know him, he's a very well-known Buddhist. For years, like Kristin and I, he just kind of blew us off, and Richie Davison as well, John Kabat-Zinn. I mean, all these people just like blew us off because we were part of the problem, because we're focusing on the self. Now they've come around, thank goodness. But really, if you don't take seriously suffering, the suffering of having a separate self and the suffering caused by all the inequality in the world and injustice, then what? I don't know. Then it's just, I don't know. It's just not, it's not good. I don't even know what the right way to describe it. It's actually not helpful. Maybe that's it. It's actually not helpful. And ultimately it's kind of selfish, right?
We're going real deep, Kristin.
I know.
I love it.
I've had a real tiring day too. I've been driving all day, so I may also just be rambling. But please, really, I would please make comments. I would love to have this be more of a conversation as opposed to me just talking. We aren't that big a group. Anyone else want to say anything about any of this? You all have just as much wisdom as I do, that's for sure.
All I wanted to say is how amazing is this that I'm actually talking to you. I just have to say that. And I want to come to Austin and meet you one day in person and give you a hug. It's amazing. All your books have been just so important in my life. Thank you.
Thank you.
Gail, go ahead and ask away.
I'd also love to say thank you. Thank you for being here. And thank you for being right out there with these conversations in many directions. I could sit here and do this for 3 hours, but we won't. But I wanted to actually redirect just a tiny bit in terms of your actual work with Dell Children's.
Oh, okay. All right. Okay. So reel in feminism and get back to this.
No, I'm never like, keep it going, sister. Let me tell you, I'm the furthest out there. But in terms of our work together, and exactly.
Absolutely.
No, exactly, because of the crossover between gender, culture, and power, and what everybody on this group struggles against daily in that setting that you just heard about, that we actually totally agree with everything you said.
Yeah.
How to actually bring this forth. One, like how I'd love to know your elevator speech to the executives, because I don't really get it, why they don't get it, honestly.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
And just learning from some of your learnings about how to actuate this in these settings, because there's a number of us on this group right now that are trying to bring that or something very, very similar in a support way, and in an empowerment way, just as you're talking about, to hospitals. So we'd love to learn from that.
Right. So I know that, so Natalie Bell at the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion is really heading up the SCHC program, Self-Compassion for Healthcare Communities. And I think, I don't know where she is with Kaiser, but I think they're going to roll it out and in a big way. Do you know, Ni Chang? Have you been talking to
last I heard it was a go. Yeah, for Kaiser, North California.
So that's probably where it will start, is some healthcare groups will start implementing it. And then if we can start getting some good data in, because we got a little bit of data on the program, but it's not big data. I suspect, like everything, the bottom line will probably drive the adoption of this. Mm-hmm. If they can get like less turnover rates, fewer sick days, I'd love to see if there's higher patient satisfaction. I don't know if you get that or not, but perhaps think data like that, I think that would start to change it. But it's really a matter of changing the culture. So the whole reason we call it Self-Compassion for Healthcare Communities, and Krista Gregory, she's at Dell Children's, and she's the one who really encouraged me to come into there and create a shortened version of the program. What she saw is almost the biggest effect the program had was on the culture of Dell Children's, which of course you can imagine, it's all about self-sacrifice. Oh, I work 3 shifts straight without sleeping, that kind of I'm self-sacrifice more than you do type of thing. And so the people felt like they were valued for self-sacrificing and putting patients first and working hard. And that what started happening once we started teaching these groups of healthcare staff to be self-compassionate is the culture started changing, right? And they started, even people who hadn't taken the program started to get the idea of self-compassion and the whole idea that self-compassion is a good thing that we should be encouraging people to have, and we should be encouraging people to be kind and supportive to themselves and to take care of their needs. That seemed to, and then what happens, we were teaching it to all the staff, and then the parents of the kids at Dell Children's Hospital said, "Give me some of that," right? And then we started teaching them. And I don't know if they're still teaching parents there or not. To be honest, I've been so busy, I haven't been so involved with Dell Children's anymore. But I think that's probably going to be the way it works. Is there'll be some early adopters. Well, Kaiser seems to be the first one taking it really seriously, but they're big, right? And I bet you Aetna won't be far behind, because Aetna's, that they're so into their mindfulness programs. Is anyone here involved with Aetna, by the way? No, because I know they were one of the early adopters of mindfulness programs, and they did a ton of research on it and found that it saved them money, which got other healthcare groups to start down the mindfulness wagon. And I think that also may be a way in, is because mindfulness has already made some good inroads in the healthcare field. Self-compassion is kind of, you can kind of think of it as just an add-on. You don't have to start from scratch. If you just throw in some self-compassion to your pre-existing mindfulness programs, that's also, I think, a really useful way to go. But really, burnout, the data on burnout is the thing that's going to convince the powers that be most effectively. It's really effective for reducing burnout. But I hope you read that book, that part where I said that doesn't mean that you just have to throw some self-compassion at your overworked underpaid healthcare workers, and that's going to solve the problem. And, we really got to make sure that, again, the compassion goes inward and outward in terms of making sure the systems change, as well as having the tools to cope with burnout.
Thanks, Kristin. And the program is Self-Compassion for Healthcare Communities, and you can actually take it through the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion. Like, I'm in a cohort right now, taught by Mila, actually.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yeah. How are you finding it?
Oh, I love it so far.
Well, it's basically the MSc program, right? So it's just kind of select practices. But the big thing is that all the practice can be done on the job, right? As you're working, nothing has to be done outside of your working hours, because the last thing healthcare workers need is something else to do. And so really it's a way of making the stress you encounter on the job easier to handle, as opposed to more difficult. So that was the biggest barrier, is people. Well, the other thing the barrier was time. So we gave people pizza. I think I wrote about this. We gave people food, which, because people have to eat. And that may be another really practical way to bring this program into healthcare settings, is lunchtime, come get your pizza. While you eat your pizza, learn some self-compassion. And, that might be a way to make it practical to get it out there. But yeah, so right now we're offering it online, but I think it's going to be most effective in hospitals themselves, or with particular groups of staff, because that's when you get the culture change. So if you have individuals taking it online, yeah, it might help them as an individual, but it really makes a difference when a critical mass of people get the training in a particular setting, and then the culture starts changing. And that's where you really see the powerful effects, I think.
And yes, it's available also at UCSD Center for Mindfulness as well.
Great.
Jillian, did you have a question for Kristin?
I have tons of things to say, and I'm just so appreciative for being here. I found Kristin. I write for Kevin MD, and my story is that I had pretty severe burnout that led to suicidal ideation. And I have a very long history of an eating disorder. I have a long history of anorexia. So I was at your most recent webinar for eating disorders. So there's so much that self-compassion helped for me to heal and to really get to the point that I'm not only surviving, but working to live quality of life. And where I see self-compassion, it's in healthcare. Our society is so obsessed with weight, and like, why, if we could prescribe self-compassion to these patients that are using, I feel like diet culture to me is such an oppressive. I think that's the male dominated approach that is really targeting our vulnerabilities and making women want to feel the need to be smaller. And I'm like, if we could just have my ultimate, I would say FU, or fight against diet culture is really I spent so much time working against the abuse of diet culture and the abuse of anorexia. And then I was in Air Force oral surgery, very male dominated, and you work against the abuse of all that. And when you develop so much self-compassion, you can really name and see the oppressive. You can no longer be blinded to that culture.
Mhm.
And it was like ultimately that self-compassion so strong, kind of what you said in the beginning. And I'm reading that fierce self-compassion really spoke to me, because I was like, that's what it is. You're like, I'm so compassionate that I am not going to accept this oppressive BS any longer. And once you have that compassion, there's like no turning back. So I just really want to thank you for that, because I think there's the role when it comes to weight. And then I'm on a burnout committee within my own institution, and we talk about it, and there's no real solutions. I see self-compassion as such an important solution, especially when I'm thinking like my high end is we're losing physicians to suicide. I'm like, we are losing. And so if we can have them, when I left surgery, it took me 5 years to even show my face, because you just like the shame or the guilt. And I'm like, for me, this past year is all about self-compassion and forgiving myself for whatever I made it mean to leave a residency, to leave the military, to feel like a failure. And then I'm like, to what standards am I a failure? It's to what culture's saying. And even now, I have a boss who our values conflict. And I was able to just say, you know what, we are hitting heads because our values are conflicting. And I learned that through the self-compassion, because that allows us to create the boundaries to say like, these are my boundaries. Kind of like when you were talking about to be selfish, I'm like, well, when we're self-compassionate, we know we can better see our boundaries and to know when they're crossed.
Right.
And without that self-compassion, I feel like our people pleasers, we have it in healthcare, women, we're people pleasers. We want to do good, we're perfectionistic, and then our boundaries get crossed. So I had so much to say, and I said it all at you at one time.
No. Well,
My
thank
gratitude
you.
is so high, and I'm glad that this got rescheduled, because then Justy was able to tell me, I posted your book with a quote, and I'm like, everyone needs this, and Justy's like, actually, she's coming. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. So very serendipitous, and I'm just happy to be here. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Jillian, and thank you for sharing that. I mean, it strikes me like your incredible bravery, right? To just come out and even like some of the things that even dropping out is an incredible act of bravery. You did it for 5 years, you said, but that's an incredible act of bravery. That's an act of self-compassion, right? Just to say, this isn't working for me. I'm going to do something different. I need to survive here. And that you're coming through it and helping other people is just really inspiring. So thank you.
Yeah, I would say, and I appreciate you saying that. And it just highlights, like, I would want to talk to you all day long. So I'm like, it was knowing, like, going out, even for anorexia, I never wanted to speak up because I knew people were going to say things, right? Whatever they say. But having so much self-compassion that I can now stand whatever people say and know I'm fine. Like, I can listen, and it can be a point of, if people say things that are very judgmental, I can appreciate that that's a reflection of them and their biases, and I can stand there, and if they want to learn more, great, and if they don't, great. Like, I am who I am now.
Yeah.
And self-compassion, and I love to spread it. And I love when other people are like, hey, I'm interested, or you see people and you're like, you want to create that safe space for them so they can develop their self-compassion, and while you're kind of guarding them from the pain of experiencing maybe what you've gone through, in order to realize that it's such a great need.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jillian, for being vulnerable and sharing that. Iljana, you had your hand up?
Hello. Yes, I'm Ilyana Gafar. I'm ped surgeon in New York. And I never read the books for book club, but I have seen you around. And I think that
Where are you? I'm not.
Oh, I think you muted again, Ilyana. There you go.
There you go.
York. How about now? Anybody?
Yeah.
Okay, I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm in New York. And I was just going to say that some of these people, like Jessie, knows I'm pretty tough on myself. But I think something that was really helpful, my friend actually found out about you when she was working through some of her mom with borderline personality. And they were like, that test you have, that's like your self-compassion score.
Mm-hmm.
And the other test is like, wow, I'm really low. And just knowing, well,
Yeah.
first off, seeing that other people, like, who doesn't score this low? There are people out there who do not have this level of like intense fire and criticalness about them. I think just helpful anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then it just gives some language to be like, oh, I mean, I'm really good at not being compassionate. It's one of my strengths. But then also, you know, giving yourself credit for being good at something, but then also seeing that there's something else to work on, I think has been really helpful. So I squeeze in what I can, and a full book usually doesn't make it. But the little quick, simple, and I was like, all right, I'm like a 1.5 on this and a 2 point whatever on the other. So thanks for those quick, easy skills and your like very fast body scans, and just like that was one of the things I listened to of yours, where it's like, what's stressing you out and where is it in your body? Because I'm a big body person.
Right. Yeah.
Like touch that and give it a little bit of care. And that's it's for me, like I work in bodies with my body to fix bodies. And so words sometimes just get trapped in my head, but the body work is really helpful. So thanks. And that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eliana. And Kristin's meditations that she guides are available on the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion website, and also self-compassion.org, and also on Insight Timer, the app as well. Ghazala, I think this will be the last question. And then Kristin, do you mind leading us in a short practice to kind of close the session? And I want to be respectful of your time, and then we'll be hanging out for probably another 15 minutes.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
So not really a question. I just wanted to, echo so many of the comments that have already been said. And especially though, was really happy to hear you name the social justice, the community aspects of whether it's mindfulness, but also compassion. And because there's often this trend of everything being about me, and this individualistic, that mindfulness approach where it's, distorted to be all about like just the individual and, stress reduction and controlling their mind and whatever, and about feeling good all the time. And it's like, I'll just live in this bubble and not, and I see this a lot at, I teach MBSR and other, it's really hard sometimes to get people interested in calling out events that are happening in the community, and it's like, well, maybe we want to bring that up in our session. And like, there's this, no, that's too intense. No, that's too triggering. And I find that I have to hold myself in that space of both fierce self-compassion, but also tender, because when I'm picking up, I need that fierce self-compassion to show up. But then at the same time, I'm feeling a lot of fear. And so I'm holding myself tenderly, because as you were saying, when you express any emotions that are strong, anger or passion or whatever, grief, it's like people are like, whoa, you're too triggering, you're too intense, you're too whatever, including people in the mindfulness community, and it's like, okay, then it's like I'm alone. Who's with me here? Who am I not too much for? And so I just found that really refreshing. We had a conversation just yesterday about equanimity, and that's exactly what I was saying. I was like, these words such as neutral or being impartial. I'm like, sometimes being neutral is being like, that's being harmful.
You're part of the problem sometimes.
Yeah. And so I wanted to thank you for naming that. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
So heartfelt thank you, Kristin, for being here for this rich discussion. And I'll have you take it away to lead us in a practice.
Okay, well, let's see, what should I do? Do you have any requests?
I have a request. It was just a beautiful one that you did at the Mindful Healthcare Summit that was all about like what we hold and bringing forth what we can do, for people suffering, but not taking it all on. I don't know if you recall that one.
Well, was that compassion with equanimity? Was that the one where we think about, maybe what I'll do a So in the mindful self-compassion program, we teach just breathe, something called breathing compassion in and out. So you can do it in a caregiving context. It can be used specifically to deal like with the feelings of burnout, or can we just felt more generally? So maybe I'll just do that one, and then you guys can just let whoever you want come to mind. Yeah, that's a nice one. We'll do breathing compassion in and out. Okay, all right, so go ahead and close your eyes if you feel comfortable doing so. Maybe just drop out of your head into your body. All right, so feeling your feet on the floor, the weight of your body on the chair. And start to become aware of your own presence. Right, the fact that you are here now, experiencing. And just maybe noticing what's going on in your body. Really not thinking about what's going on, but really feeling your body and what's going on. And starting to notice your breathing. The natural flow of air in and out. The rising and falling of your chest. And then focusing on your in-breath in particular, really just noticing each inhalation. Noticing that as you breathe in, you're breathing in the oxygen that your body needs. Right, quite unconsciously, we breathe in what we need to live. We nurture ourselves with oxygen with each in-breath. And as you breathe in, you might also imagine that you're just breathing in what you need in the moment. Right? Maybe that's kindness, or love, or acceptance. Or maybe it's something like strength or patience. But as you breathe in, just imagine that you're breathing in exactly what you need in this moment. And then now what I'd like you to do is start focusing on the out breath. Right, so as we breathe out, we're breathing out the carbon dioxide that trees need to live. But I'd also like you to maybe consider thinking about someone you know who's suffering. This could be a patient of yours. It could be someone you know in your life. It could be a group of people in Ukraine, or other groups of people, maybe people who are being oppressed. So just see what comes to mind. Try not to overthink it. A person or group of people. And as you breathe out, imagining that you're breathing out compassion or goodness for this other. Right? Breathing out what they need. Courage, peace, care, whatever it is that they need to be well. And then bringing both together. So as you breathe in for yourself. And as you breathe out for the other. So compassion in, compassion out. In and out. One for me and one for you. And feel free to adjust the ratio as needed. Maybe it's 3 for me and 1 for you. Right? Or maybe you're drawn more to focus on the other. So the giving doesn't have to be exactly equal, but we do need to always remember ourselves and others in this circle of compassion. And if you like, you could even let this boundary between self and other dissolve. So that you're just breathing compassion and omnidirectional. Right? Like the waves of an ocean, it's all one ocean. An ocean of compassion. And letting the practice go. And when you're ready, opening your eyes.
Thank you so much, Kristin.
You're welcome. I needed that. That was good for me too. All right, well, I just heard my son come in and he's going to burst through the door any moment. So I will sign off, but thank you all. And thank you all for your kind words and your support and for spreading the good word.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Right.
Kristin.
And thanks, Nisha. I'm not going to be at the board meeting. I'm going to be on this retreat. So I'll see you soon.
Okay, enjoy your
Okay.
retreat.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
Kristin.
Bye.
Thank you, Nichang, for making it happen.
Oh, you're so
Thank you,
welcome, everyone.
Nichang.
Thank you, everyone, so much for being here. And it's really my honor to be able to facilitate this and hold space. So I really appreciate you all for being here. And hopefully that was a poignant, worthwhile session for all of you. And hopefully this is just the beginning. I'm hoping in the future to bring on Chris Germer. And we'll see other special guests into the Mindful Healthcare Collective as well. So with that, we have 1 minute left. And yes, this session has been recorded, so I'll post the link in the Mindful Healthcare Collective. And if you're already on the email list, which you are if you got into the session, then I'll also post a link there as well too. So yeah, so thanks everyone. I'm just gonna hang out here until people sign off, but otherwise I'll stop the recording. Much gratitude. May you be well, may you be safe, may you be free from harm. Plugging Mindful Healthcare Collective upcoming events, Dr. Yvonne Ator is doing her Respite for Thriving Physicians, leading that this Saturday. And then Jessie is not teaching yoga this weekend, but we'll be back on April 2nd for live yoga classes, but you can join her on her YouTube channel for Mindful Yoga. And hopefully we'll see you at an upcoming Mindful Healthcare Collective event otherwise. Thanks everyone. Have a good night, good evening.